What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Nike GT Hustle 3. Let's get into them. Now, honestly, it doesn't seem that long ago that we saw the GT Hustle 2 debut, and from the 2s to the 3s, honestly, it couldn't be a more different shoe. And most of that is for the good. Now, looking at this thing in the uppers, it is a combination of TPU and textile meshing going throughout the entire upper. It does look pretty substantial, and it does feel substantial to the touch, as when you're rubbing your finger on it, and you look on the microscope, and it is pretty chunky. Look at the breathability test on this thing, a lot different versus if the insole is in versus if it is not. Now, without the insole, this thing only heated up 97.3 degrees. That's what we're used to seeing with Nike shoes, really just proficient breathability. However, if you do have that insole in, which I believe is made of Zoom X foam, that jumped 21 degrees increase in heating. So really the uppers, look at the mapping of them, the breathability mapping. I mean, fog's coming out everywhere. The tongue, the forefoot, the medial and lateral side of the midfoot. These things are really just meant for breathability. The one thing I noticed though was, the removable insole, definitely that's where the heat was. I could feel it underfoot that my feet were getting a little bit warm with this thing on. Now, it does make the shoe feel a little bit more cushion, a little more bouncy, a little more pillowy, but if you're looking for breathability, this is your culprit, because the rest of the shoe, like I said, is really just incredible when it comes to moisture retention as well as just heat dissipation. Like I was talking about that tongue, it does have giant macro pores in there. You can just see with the naked eye. It does have 2 levels of padding throughout the entire tongue. I noticed with me with the shoelaces really had no irritation. It was pretty plush and comfortable. However, it is not gusseted. It is only attached at the distal end of the tongue to the vamp of the shoe. So, I mean, it is a little bit weak in terms of side to side, but there is, an eyelet for the laces to go through, so that does keep it a little bit more intact. And it does interact with this really substantial ankle collar so much that really the lockdown is still pretty good. Heel slippage on this for me was absolutely none. I could see if you have a little bit more of a narrow heel, you might get very, very mild heel slippage, but in terms of just overall protection for heel slippage, it's absolutely fantastic. As you go into the heel counter of the shoe, like I said, it is decently padded, but you do have that double thick heel counter like in the KD shoes, like in the Sabrina 2, which does just impart so much stability to the rear foot. The one thing I will caution though on, if you look at the upper durability test, 10-second tires, grit sandpaper, the burr does start to work through this. But the other thing is not so much to abrasion resistance, since there is exposed foam here anyway. It's blunt containment in the uppers, that you're sitting so high off the ground in the forefoot, and there's so much between your feet and the ground in terms of, 2 layers of air with that urethane in between plus the foam, that the containment on these is not the greatest for someone that doesn't have really good balance. I could even feel my foot kind of pushing out of the forefoot. The midfoot is fine. We'll talk about this when we get to the fit section. But in terms of containment from the distal midfoot on, honestly, it is a little bit suspect, even though the uppers, like I say, they feel strong to the touch. When you actually put your foot in them, you can definitely tell that they are expanding on you. But getting into the midsole teardown, this is where I was a little confused, because Nike kept talking about a Zoom X Strobel. I'm guessing they're talking about the removable insole, because the Strobel on this one in the rear foot, just foam, and then as it goes into the forefoot, you do get Zoom Strobel, and then a very chunky Zoom Air unit here underneath of that. Now, in between those double stacked Zoom Air units, there is actually foam in there. The foam on the outside with your hands, it feels like Phylon, but underfoot feels like React, and on the microscope, it looks like React, so I'm going with a full bed of React foam here. The more pleasant surprise, though, is that there is a top-loaded shank, which is pretty stiff. It's not super long, but it's hefty up there, right? It was actually a little bit tougher to get through with my knife. Now, what I noticed is, you look at the bounce height test, really no surprise. In the rear foot, only 29 centimeters, in the forefoot, 45 centimeters, and I'll bet you if that wasn't React foam in between those Zoom Air units in the forefoot, it probably would have gotten a little bit higher. I've noticed recently with React foam that it doesn't feel super bouncy. It has, like I said, it's more of a shock absorbing type foam. In these ones, in the rear foot, honestly, it felt a little stiff. If you didn't have the removable insole in there, just to, your foot, it didn't feel as forgiving even as some Phylons did. So really a tale of two shoes. And like I said, if you've got the removable insole in there, it feels really plush no matter what. Remember, this is going to bottom out. So I think if you're going to replace this with a decent orthotic, it's honestly not going to matter too much. But I'd say, like I said, in the rear foot, this shoe is much more shock absorbing, whereas in the forefoot, much more, energy returning, especially with that giant chunky Zoom Air unit. They call it a Mustang unit. It's a pretty chunky zoom, and then that zoom strobe. But looking at the outsole tread, you can really see some inspiration from the Jordan 38 with that little break point here on the lateral side, and that just the shape of it looks exactly like the Jordan 38, right where that X-plate shank comes in the forefoot. Now that does allow a lot of movement of that rubber, almost like, squeezes in on itself. If you look at it on the viewing box, you can kind of see where that's like kind of compressing and expanding right there, just kind of allows that, which is nice. The tread itself is basically just a track pattern. It's these really long linear ovoid lines of tread, a little more horizontal in the forefoot, right? A little bit more, linear in the midfoot. Now, if you look at this thing on the grip test ramp, 39 degrees this thing slipped at. The one thing I noticed is when you are pushing laterally, right, and trying to stop laterally, that little cutout there on the lateral side, you can feel that working, which is really nice. Like I said, especially because you're not getting a lot of ground feel on these really at all. And then you have this really distal, very extreme forefoot rocker on these. Now that really does allow easy transition step because the rest of the shoe is so flat to the ground. Does not feel unstable. It's distal enough that it doesn't feel unstable. The one thing I noticed with it is it made my fourth toe go numb the first couple times I played in them. After that, it was fine. I didn't notice it, but I did notice that's what was going on. There really is a lot going on in the very distal tip of the shoe. Like I said, we'll talk about in the fit section though. Look at this thing on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Now, even though the durometer comes in at 17.5, which is actually a pretty decent hardness for the rubber, the burr still gets about 1 millimeter of damage on this. In terms of speed ratio, comes in at a 2.56, then a shank score of 0.2 brings that thing up to a 2.76. I think that on the straights, that's actually underselling it, and I think cornering, that's overselling it. These shoes, speed is not their issue. These things have speed in spades. That's say that 5 times fast. But I mean, just getting from coast to coast on these, it's about the easiest shoe out there to do it in. I would say these are easier to get from coast to coast than the GT Cut 3. They're just, like I said, they just bound up and down, especially with the geometry of the forefoot, double stack Zoom Air, and it's just the way the shoe moves. It's just so effortless, just going coast to coast, repeat rebounds and everything. It's just great. It's just that stopping, like I said, because you're so high up in the forefoot, yeah, that rubber compresses and you do get a lot of grip from that, right? The grip on these, it's fantastic, both indoors as well as outdoors. I thought they were really nice. It's just that when it does grip, sometimes you do feel like you could be pushing over on the shoe. So, like I said, speed is fine. It's just coming to the stop. That's kind of, I could see being the issue for somebody with some instability. But getting into the Favorite GT Outsole 3, this is where these things are a little bit odd. Now, number one, in terms of the inflare on these, they come in at a 15-degree inflare, which is pretty good. That thing is pretty inflared, but the thing is the inflare is so distal in the shoe, it really inflares a little bit further up into the toes than some other shoes do. So it does stay pretty flat there in the midfoot, so it really only kind of scrunches where the toes are. Now these things are a little bit short. They come in at only 28.5 centimeters length for my men's size 11. The width is 9.2 centimeters, which is pretty medium. And then in terms of the toe box width, 10.3 centimeters, and then a 26-degree toe box taper, which honestly is a little bit more forgiving. It's just that, number one, it's rockered, right? So it's tilted up in the distal forefoot. It's tapered very distally in the forefoot. So there's just a lot going on, very distal in the shoe. So if you're someone that's long-toed, you're going to have some issues with this. I know for me, I'm wide and C-shaped. So like I said, my foot just did not match up with where the rocker was and the inflare was, and that's why until I broke them in, I got a little numbness in my fourth toe because it was just scrunching right in that little spot. I would say if you are a narrow or medium foot, I probably would just go true to size on these ones. They're going to be a little more forgiving, but in terms of the shoe, in terms of the length of it going down, you might really start scrunching into these. If you're a 2E, honestly, I think you can go up a half size and then you're kind of right in the money with these things in terms of forgiveness, width, as well as length. If you want to try to break these in true to size, if you're short-toed, or if you just want a little more of a one-to-one fit, I broke them in true to size. Like I said, had some numbness. That was because of the shape of my foot. So I think it's more the length of your foot that's going to dictate if you're a 2E. If you go up a 4E, I'd probably just go up one size. Like I said, the lockdown is so good and the heel slippage is so, minimal that I think these are great for that. Now, in terms of the snake bitten foot, I would say anybody with rear foot pain, you need an orthotic in these, or, you know, find replacement insoles of these, because without that, like I said, they absorb shock, right? You know, you saw the ball bearing, it just dies on there, but it's not super plush. The removable insole does a lot of that work, a lot of that feeling of that work on these. But if you put an orthotic in them in the rear foot, I think then, you know, they're okay. In terms of ball of foot pain, they are fantastic with that double stack Zoom area unit, especially somebody with like metatarsalgia, you know, stress fractures from previous stress fractures, especially because there is a stiff top-loaded shank in there, so your midfoot's getting propped up on that. So there is still some structure to that shoe, you know, that is aiding in those Zoom air units, kind of giving you a little bit more forgiveness in that forefoot. If you're someone that's a midfoot or an ankle sprainer, I say these things are probably a no-go. I never got unstable in these when I was playing them. I'll give you that caveat. I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to roll in these things. I did not, but like I said, there is no ground contact on these. You feel like you are really propped up. So for me, I think I was just paying attention a lot more and just making sure like I was sure-footed in these. But I could see you being in a game, right, stepping on someone's foot, not paying attention, just trying to get a shot off, right, trying to get past someone, and you're not really focused on the shoe like I am with my reviews. I could see you rolling over really easy in these. So in terms of lumps, bumps, bruises, especially with an orthotic in this, especially because they accept orthotics and braces so well, I think they're fine for everything, like I said, except for instability. In terms of the performance, you know, playability of the GT Hustle 3, honestly, for me, these have been my favorite Nike shoes to have on, except for the Sabrina 2s and the more recent LeBron signature lines. Not the Witness, not the next gens, but just, you know, his actual signature lines. And that's just because they're just so forgiving, and just the feeling, the ease of bounce off the ground, the ease of launch, and the ease of getting coast to coast. I know I really harped on that in the speed section, but, you know, for me that makes a lot of videos, I'm out on some more unforgiving courts a lot of the time making these videos. I can really appreciate a shoe that gets up off the ground so easily over and over and over again. And in this line, with the shank in it versus some other Nikes that don't, the durability of that is going to be a lot more. That durability of bounce out of these is going to be a lot more. Yeah, the React in the rear foot, I think for crash landings on your heels, that might start to feel a little bit worse over time once you bottom this out. But I think if you have an orthotic in there, that's okay. If you stay up on the balls of your foot, like I said, I think they're fantastic. Like I said, I don't think that they are the most stable things on the planet. So if you're someone that is going through a crowd a lot, or someone that does find themselves in foot-to-foot combat, stepping on people, getting stepped on, then I think you're really going to start to see kind of the downsides of this shoe pop up a little more and more. If you are someone that's looking for a little bit more of a fast break shoe, or a shoe to help with that, someone's looking to help with a little more speed, right, trying to show off a little bit more of your speed, then I think, like I said, these are just out of this world. And if you're someone, like I said, looking to save your legs a little bit, a shoe that's not super heavy, but that gives you the trappings of a little bit more of a, you know, bulky midsole, these things, like I said, one of the better ones out there, and it really reminds me of the original, like the Nike GT Run before the Hustle, right? The Run with the forefoot landing pad of that Zoom. That's what this a little more reminds you of, just a little bit more of a stout package. I think, like I said, you can't be unstable. You can't be someone that's prone to ankle spraining. But if you're not, like I said, if you're someone that more runs just front to back, right? You're not really worried about the side to side cutting power of these things. I mean, I think, you know, like I said, this is one of the better Nike models that have come out recently. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you've come from the GT Hustle 2, which I kind of thought was, you know, like a person without a country almost. I'm not really sure what they were made for, to be honest. The outsole tread was interesting, but other than that, they just felt a little bit floppy. And then go to these, the next in the line, which they're so stout. They've got so much going on, right? They're so plush. They've got just such feel to them. I'd love to know kind of if you're kind of giving these a try. So leave me a comment down below. And speaking of the Nike Sabrina 2, if you want to see that shoe go under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, Gerber, and foam. I'll see you soon in the Sneakerverse.